What's going on, you guys? I've been helping people evaluate and look at buying FedEx businesses for basically 15 years now. And one of the things that I like to do is to get a pulse on the market by looking at all the listings one by one, taking a look at the asking price, who the brokers are, what the average valuation multiples are, and so on. And so as I was going through this in August of 2025, there were 8 different things that I wrote down here that we're going to go over that I think are going to be super valuable for you to consider if you are really thinking about buying one of these types of businesses in 2025. And so the first thing is the commoditization of routes. So it used to be that 5, 10, 15 years ago, you could basically consider most of the routes were basically the same. They're all FedEx routes. Maybe they were a bit different in size or whatever, but that was kind of it. Now, I don't really believe that a lot of FedEx routes are so similar that they deserve to be valued via commoditization, i.e. comps, right? Looking at what everyone else is selling for and then basing my valuation on that. The reason why is that you can kind of start to intuitively realize that if you have one business that is running 6 days a week versus 7 days a week, it might be harder, might be easier to manage. One business that has already gone through 2.0 integration with the network 2.0 integration, and maybe has less risk than one that's in transition or one that's hasn't had it happen at all. And so when you start to stack that on top of like dealing with routes that are, let's say, doing 300 miles a day round trip in Wyoming versus one that's in Tampa, Florida, that's doing 30 miles round trip, dealing with all these sorts of things means that it's more and more and more different than what we've seen in the past. And if they are so different, then they really don't deserve to be, again, valued via this average or commoditization metric, if you will. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that you've got one broker essentially that I've noticed that is controlling 40% of the listings. Now, whether the listings are all completely active and so on and so forth, and they're not just for lead gen, let's just pretend that they are active. Well, if you have one person that is controlling the valuation via the asking price, because remember, when a seller wants to sell their business, one of the big values that a business broker brings to the table is valuing that asset. So the business broker says, hey, right now we're selling at a 3x multiple. That's what we think that we're seeing a lot of people, actually pay for these businesses. So that's what we think that your business is worth. So if you have that same broker and he's like, you know what, everyone else is underpriced selling at 3.0. We want to sell at 3.5. It's going to skew that market if they control literally 40% of all the listings. So it's not that it's good or bad or anything. I just want you to be aware that there is a lot of power whenever you have one broker that is controlling that amount of listings. That said, we are at about a 3.0x valuation on average throughout all these things. Now, that 3x valuation is not going to be as valuable as we would like it to be, or it has been in the past, and we're going to go through all the other points on why that's the case. So the next point is that you've got essentially this issue with BizQuest. So BizQuest, very valuable, but it's sort of grown so much to what it was 15 years ago that it's sort of outgrown its functionality. So like you cannot sort by the valuation multiple. You cannot sort even by the cash flow anymore. For some reason or other, they like took that away. I don't know why, but they did. One of the other things is their really lack of features around seller financing. So the way seller financing is denoted is it's basically just a checkbox in the listing. There's seller financing. Well, is it seller financing for 5%, 10%, 80%, which is kind of like what it should be? Like, hey, seller financing means I don't have to go to a bank, right? Like they've got the ability to finance this thing themselves. And so, again, there's a huge spectrum there, but we can't see what that is. So that leads us to another problem, which is that brokers, in efforts to make their listings stand out, when you've got over 500 listings, which is what we do have currently in August 2025, when you've got 500 plus listings, how do you make your client, the seller, be able to stand out? Well, maybe we can change this asking price. Now, the asking price is supposed to be the full purchase price with no debt. Well, now they're changing that a little bit. So some of the brokers out there are changing the asking price to the down payment amount. That's not what it's supposed to be. But the broker doesn't have any other way to denote like, hey, this is if you bring $400,000 to the table, we can get you financed for the rest because we've got $1 million of vehicle financing and another $1 million of seller financing. Well, now that's a $2.4 million asking price essentially the purchase price, right? But it looks like a $400,000 asking price. And whenever you have $400,000 net income, it looks like a 1x valuation. Wow, 400K asking, 400K net, 1x valuation. Wow. Is it distress? Is this the best deal in the world? No. They just changed the asking price to be a down payment amount. And then when you start to do your evaluation, you're burdened with all this debt that they didn't want to tell you about up front. Now, again, in the broker's defense, there's no other way for them to really stand out. Now, some brokers are like, look, I understand that we're supposed to stand out, but purchase price is the asking price. That's what we're going to do. And we're sticking with it. That's fine. But now they lose out to these other brokers that are, basically not abusing, sounds like a strong word, but sort of trying to hack through what the seller financing it really is, right? So that causes yet another problem. So when you have this, and you're looking at all these different listings, and especially whenever you've got hundreds of listings out there, there are typos that I've started to notice in these listings that are very apparent, right? So for example, saying that your route is listed in Savannah, California versus Savannah, Georgia. That's obvious, and I can spot that. But it makes you wonder, like, well, if they weren't double checking on their stuff, because hey, I make typos, everybody makes typos. Was it an accident? Was it on purpose? We don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is, the typos are there. So is this to attract people in California looking for businesses that are searching for only businesses in California? And then when they call up, they say, oh, sorry, that thing's actually in Savannah, Georgia, but hey, you should buy it because this thing is effortless and absentee and can be run remote easily or whatever. And now that helps find another buyer, helps sell the thing faster. And again, this is why you want to use a broker a lot of times to be able to sell your routes, because they're doing things like this. Now, again, whether that typo is intentional or not, it just makes you wonder, are they typoing other things if they're not double checking their work? Maybe the amount of routes, maybe the net income, maybe even the asking price is a typo. Who knows? Just sort of makes me think that the reliability of looking at some of the data points is maybe less than what we're used to seeing. The next thing that we have here is the vicious cycle of margins. So the issue with the margins is that a lot of buyers right now want to see a specific percentage for the net income based on that gross. So they're grossing $1 million. We should see 20% margin. So we want to see 200,000 essentially in the net. That's what's normal. That's what we believe. And if a particular seller has $400,000 net on $1 million, they don't believe it, think he's exaggerating, and so on. So the brokers right now have understood that, like, hey, wherever this started, it doesn't matter. Whoever started it, whatever Reddit forum or whatever, people want to see these margins. So instead of asking the seller for how much they're actually making, the brokers are like, we don't care. Just let us see your weekly service statements, your settlements, essentially. We're going to look at your gross, and then we're just going to apply these percentages blanket for all of these deals. Now, of course, margins don't work. You can imagine very easily that margins don't work if you consider that there are two businesses, let's say, that are grossing $1 million, one in downtown Manhattan that does maybe 5 miles a day round trip and basically has essentially no gas expense, versus another one in Wyoming that does 300 miles a day round trip. Well, that's got a ton of gas that's going to that. But if you are believing like, oh, well, the gas expense should be 15% because that's going to help us figure out all the expenses to be able to get to that 30% margin, our net income. Well, it doesn't work, right? Because like both of these deals are not spending the same 15% of their gross on gas. Like it just doesn't work. Doesn't matter. The brokers are like, this is what people want. We're just going to give it to them, and they can figure out what they think it's actually worth or what it's actually making whenever they go through their evaluation. Doesn't mean the business is bad, but it does mean that the net income is potentially skewed. So what this does mean is that all the people that were doing better are going to be pulled back down. The people that are doing worse than those margins are going to be pulled up to the average valuation, not valuation, but like that average percentage in terms of the margin. So that means we have an asking price that's not valid because of the whole seller financing thing and so on, or vehicle financing. Then we have the net income, no longer valid because they're using these blanket margin percentages that people want to see. So that means both of these things are invalid. That means, of course, our valuation, our 3x valuation, is not quite so valuable either. You stack in the idea that you have a bunch of typos, and now we can't even really rely on the data that's even being presented which is still dubious to begin with, now you got another problem. The other thing too is that when you're looking at all of these deals and you're looking at the data to be able to try to say like, well, the average, valuation is this. Again, it's almost like saying, well, the average house in America is $400,000. I'm looking at this house, it's $1.5 million. Is this overpriced? Well, one's in a slum and the other is a mansion, right? So again, they're so different. There's so many different things that are going on that currently in 2025, the valuation metrics and everything that goes along with that is much less valuable than what we've seen historically. Now, next thing and the final thing is that just because things are twisted around or the asking price or rather the net incomes or whatever aren't quite what was stated, it's still worth looking at. And then you can say whether it's a good or bad deal, because this stuff is probably happening with a lot of different businesses, a lot of different brokers, a lot of different industries. That's okay. We want to still be able to see like, hey, this thing is good. It's netting 400,000 or it was claimed to net 400,000, but it's actually netting 300,000. 300,000 is still good, right? Or maybe it is netting 400,000 just like they claimed, but instead of taking 10 hours a week, it takes 40 hours a week. Or maybe it does take 10 hours a week, just like he promised, but he's sort of under or downplaying the risk that Network 2.0 is going to have on the business next year, whenever it integrates or whatever. So again, you've got to really just sort of keep an open mind, take a look at each of these deals and be able to say whether it's good or bad, whether you want to move forward or not, as opposed to, well, this broker exaggerated things, so I don't want to deal with this industry at all. That's probably going to be the case with every industry, and you might be sort of stuck on the sidelines forever if that is the case. So anyway, several different points to consider. 3x valuation, over 500 listings. Are they all valid? Are they all active? We don't know. Is a 3x valuation all that valuable? Probably not as it used to be. But anyway, hopefully this helps you consider these things as you're looking through and considering buying one of these types of businesses. Hopefully this helps. Take care. Talk soon and bye-bye.